It was a bright Monday morning, the kind of day when the sun hits the streets just right and the whole city seems to glow. The traffic lights reflected off shiny cars rolling down the main road, and people hurried along the sidewalks heading to work or grabbing coffee. Among the stream of cars, one vehicle caught Officer Ryan's attention, a black luxury car that seemed to glide instead of roll. Ryan sat in his police cruiser, parked at the corner, watching as the car passed by. It wasn't speeding. The driver wasn't breaking any rules, but something about it made him stare a little longer. Maybe it was the contrast, a young black man behind the wheel of a car that cost more than Ryan's yearly salary. He frowned. Probably borrowed, he thought. Maybe it was a rental. Maybe something was off. His instincts, or what he thought were instincts, told him to check it out. Ryan reached for his computer and typed in the license plate number. The system beeped. Everything came back clean. Registered, insured, no outstanding tickets. Still, Ryan's mind didn't rest. He convinced himself that it was worth a closer look. He turned on his siren, just a quick flash of blue and red lights. The black car slowed down smoothly and pulled over to the side without hesitation. Inside the car, the driver sighed softly. He wasn't surprised. He'd been through this before. He looked into the rearview mirror, watching the police cruiser pull up behind him. He could already feel what was coming. The driver, a calm-looking man in his early 30s, took a deep breath. He reached for his wallet slowly, made sure his hands were visible, and pulled out his license and registration before the officer even approached. Ryan stepped out of his car, adjusting his sunglasses. He walked over with that firm official walk officers are trained to have, confident, almost rehearsed. He leaned down slightly toward the window. "Good morning, sir. You know why I pulled you over?" The driver looked up, polite but puzzled. "No, officer. I'm not sure." Ryan's eyes scanned the interior. It was spotless. Clean leather seats, no clutter, nothing suspicious. But that didn't ease his doubts. "Mind telling me where you're headed?" Ryan asked. "Just going to work," the man replied evenly. "What kind of work do you do?" "I run my own business," he said simply. Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Really, what kind of business?" "A tech company," the man answered, his voice calm but slightly weary, as if he had said those same words too many times before in similar situations. Ryan nodded slowly, though he didn't seem convinced. "You got your license and registration?" The man handed them over immediately. "Here you go." Ryan looked at the documents. Everything matched. No expired tags, no issues. Still, something in him refused to drop the suspicion. "This your car?" Ryan asked, even though the papers clearly said it was. "Yes, officer. It's mine." Ryan stood there for a moment, silent. The street was alive around them. Cars passing, people watching from the sidewalk, a few curious glances wondering what was going on. The man could feel the weight of every stare. "Step out of the vehicle for me," Ryan said suddenly. The man hesitated for a second. "Is there a problem, officer?" "I just need you to step out of the vehicle," Ryan repeated, his tone sharper. The driver didn't argue. He had learned a long time ago that arguing never helped in moments like this. Slowly, he unbuckled his seatbelt, opened the door, and stepped out. He stood tall, calm, and quiet. Ryan looked him up and down. Well-dressed, neat, confident. Not what he expected, maybe. "I'm just going to check the car," Ryan said, motioning toward it. "Sure," the man replied softly. Ryan began inspecting the car. First the trunk, then the back seat. Every part of it was clean. He looked for anything that could justify his suspicion, but there was nothing. Meanwhile, the man stood on the curb, hands at his sides, trying to stay composed. He could see people pulling out their phones, recording from a distance. He knew how these things looked online. One wrong move could turn a misunderstanding into something far worse. Ryan closed the trunk and turned to him. "You sure this is your car?" "You don't look like someone who'd own a car like this." The man blinked, keeping his voice steady. "What does someone who owns this car look like, officer?" Ryan hesitated. He didn't have an answer he could say out loud. He just shrugged. "You'd be surprised how many stolen cars we see in this area." "I'm sure," the man said quietly. "But this one isn't stolen." Ryan didn't like the tone, too calm, too sure. It made him uncomfortable, like he was the one being tested. "Look," Ryan said, crossing his arms. "I'm not trying to give you a hard time. Just doing my job." "I understand," the man said. "But sometimes your job makes people like me feel guilty for just existing." Ryan opened his mouth to respond but stopped. He wasn't used to hearing that said so plainly. The man wasn't angry, just honest. The moment hung between them, the hum of cars, the faint buzz of city sounds, the quiet tension of two people standing on opposite sides of understanding. Ryan walked around the car again, more to fill the silence than because he expected to find anything. His partner radioed in asking if he needed backup. Ryan said no, though part of him wanted someone else there, maybe to justify his choices. After another minute, he returned the documents. "Everything checks out," he said. The man nodded slowly. "So am I free to go?" Ryan hesitated. He wanted to say yes, but something in his pride didn't want to let it end there. "What's your name again?" The man told him. Ryan typed it into his in-car system. Clean record, no warrants, nothing unusual. He could feel the eyes of bystanders on him. A woman across the street was filming. Two teenagers whispered and pointed. The scene had drawn attention, and Ryan knew it didn't look good. He felt that mix of frustration and embarrassment, realizing he might have made a mistake but not wanting to admit it. "Everything's fine," he finally said, trying to sound casual. "You can go." The man nodded again, still calm. "Thank you, officer. Have a good day." He got back into his car, closed the door, and took a slow breath before starting the engine. Ryan stepped back, watching as the car pulled away smoothly, disappearing into traffic. For a few seconds, Ryan just stood there, unsure of what to think. Part of him felt relieved it was over. Another part of him felt something else, something uncomfortable, like guilt wrapped in confusion. He walked back to his cruiser and sat down. The radio buzzed softly. He looked at the screen showing the man's name again, then at the dashcam recording the entire encounter. It wasn't until he replayed the scene in his mind that he realized how it must have looked. A man stopped, questioned, and searched for no real reason other than a gut feeling that wasn't about the law at all. Still, Ryan brushed it off. He told himself he was doing his job. That's what police work was, being cautious, being thorough. But deep down, a small voice questioned that reasoning. Meanwhile, in the black car now merging back into the main road, the driver's mind was spinning too. He wasn't angry, not yet. He was tired of being seen as suspicious for simply existing in spaces people didn't expect him to be in. He'd worked hard, built a business from scratch, provided jobs for others. Yet here he was, being treated like a criminal because of a car he earned. He knew how these stories often went. He was lucky this one ended quietly, but part of him also knew it wasn't really over. Encounters like that left a mark, not a visible one, but the kind that made you drive more carefully, speak more politely, and hide the frustration that wanted to rise every time the lights flashed behind you. As he drove off, he made a quiet promise to himself. This wouldn't go unnoticed. Maybe not today, maybe not in anger, but in a way that could open eyes. Back on the corner, Ryan's partner pulled up beside him. "Everything okay?" Ryan nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said, though he didn't sound sure. "Everything's fine." His partner looked at him for a second. "You sure? You look like you saw a ghost." Ryan forced a laugh. "Just thinking." The partner shrugged and drove off, leaving Ryan alone again. He looked down the street where the black car had disappeared, and for the first time he wondered, what if I was wrong? He didn't know yet that the man he'd just stopped wasn't just another driver. In the coming days, he'd find out something that would make him rethink everything about that morning, and about himself. But for now, the city carried on, unaware that a small, quiet story had just begun, one that would soon make headlines and start conversations far beyond that sunny street. The next day, the air around the city felt the same: busy streets, horns, and people rushing to work. But inside one corner of the police department, things weren't quite as ordinary. Officer Ryan sat at his desk, sipping his coffee, staring blankly at the report he'd half written. He was supposed to file a simple traffic stop entry, just routine paperwork. But every time he looked at the words on the screen, something felt off. He replayed the stop in his head over and over. The car, the driver's calm face, the look in his eyes when Ryan asked if it was really his car. There was something about that moment that stuck with him. It wasn't anger in the man's expression. It was disappointment, and for some reason that bothered him more than anything else. Ryan tried to shake it off. He told himself he'd followed protocol, That he hadn't been rude, that he'd simply been cautious. But no matter how he spun it, the truth sat heavy in his chest. He hadn't pulled the man over because of a crime. He'd pulled him over because of an assumption. Across town, the man he'd stopped was getting ready for another busy day at his office. He walked into a modern glass building where his employees greeted him with smiles. He nodded, trying to look composed, but his mind was still replaying the flashing lights, the questions, the disbelief in the officer's tone. He'd dealt with situations like that before, but something about this one felt different. Maybe because this time people had seen it. He noticed the phones, the small crowd forming. He knew how quickly moments like that could spread online. He didn't want to make it a spectacle, but he also didn't want to stay silent. His assistant stepped into his office, holding a cup of coffee. "You okay? You look like you didn't sleep." He smiled faintly. "Just thinking." She hesitated. "Is this about what happened yesterday?" He looked up a little surprised. "You saw it?" "It's on social media," she said softly. "Someone posted a clip. It's not going viral or anything, but a few local blogs picked it up. They're calling it another example of profiling." He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his forehead. "That's exactly what I didn't want." "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "Maybe nothing. Maybe something later. I just don't want this to turn into hate." At the same time, inside the police department, a few officers were talking about the same video. Someone had found the clip online and sent it around the break room. It showed Ryan standing beside the car, questioning the driver, searching the trunk. The audio was clear enough to catch Ryan's tone when he said, "You don't look like someone who'd own a car like this." Ryan didn't know the video existed until one of his colleagues walked by and muttered, "Tough week to be you, man. What's that supposed to mean?" Ryan asked, frowning. The officer nodded toward the computer screen. "You might want to see this." Ryan clicked the link and there it was. The entire stop, recorded from a passerby's phone, already viewed thousands of times. The comments below were harsh. People were angry. They called him names, accused him of racism, demanded his badge. He leaned back in his chair, feeling the air drain from his lungs. He hadn't realized how his words sounded until he heard them played back. Out loud, they sounded colder, harsher, like something from a movie he didn't want to star in. By the afternoon, his supervisor called him in. The department needed to address the growing attention. The captain wasn't angry, but her tone was serious. "Ryan," she said, closing the office door, "we have a problem." "I saw the video," he admitted quietly. "It doesn't look good," she said. "I know you didn't mean harm, but perception matters. You understand that, right?" He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Until we sort this out, I'm putting you on administrative leave." "It's not a punishment, just procedure." Ryan wanted to argue, but the words didn't come. He just nodded again. "I understand." When he left the building later that day, the usual feeling of authority that came with his uniform was gone. He felt exposed, smaller somehow. People walking past seemed to look at him differently. Maybe it was in his head, but it felt real. He drove home in silence, his police radio switched off. The irony wasn't lost on him. Yesterday he had stopped a man for no reason. Today he was the one being stopped in a different way. Across the city, the man he'd pulled over sat at home with his laptop open. The video played again on his screen. He watched it quietly, not out of anger, but reflection. He could see both sides, his calm responses, the officer's discomfort, the tension hanging in the air. He didn't want revenge or attention. He wanted understanding. He knew change didn't come from anger. It came from conversation. But he also knew people would expect him to say something. His phone buzzed. Messages from friends, colleagues, even reporters asking for interviews. He ignored most of them until one message caught his attention. It was from someone at the mayor's office inviting him to speak at a local community meeting about equality and law enforcement. He read the message twice, thinking, maybe that was the right place to start. 2 days later, the meeting hall was full. Community members, local leaders, and several officers had shown up. The man took the stage quietly. He didn't come to accuse or embarrass anyone. He came to tell his story. "When I was pulled over," he began, "I wasn't scared. Not because I thought I was safe, but because I've learned to expect moments like that. You stay calm, polite, and hope the person across from you sees you as human." The room was silent. People listened, not just to his words but to the calm way he spoke without bitterness. "I don't hate the officer," he continued, "but I want to understand why this keeps happening. Why people like me can't just drive home without being questioned for what we own or how we look. This isn't about blame. It's about empathy." Several officers in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded, others avoided eye contact. The words hit harder because they weren't shouted. They were spoken softly, sincerely. Meanwhile, outside the hall, Ryan sat in his car, listening to the live stream on his phone. He wasn't invited, but he wanted to hear what the man would say. When he heard those words, not angry, not vengeful, just honest, something inside him cracked. He realized that the man had every reason to hate him, yet he didn't. He wanted to build understanding instead of walls. For the first time in years, Ryan saw his job in a different light. It wasn't just about laws and tickets. It was about people. About how one moment could define how someone saw the system forever. Later that night, Ryan sat at home, staring at the city lights outside his window. He opened his laptop and found the video again. He scrolled through the comments. Anger, support, debate. But then he stopped on one comment that stood out. "Change doesn't start with hate. It starts with listening." He read it over and over. Maybe that was what he needed to do, listen. The next morning, Ryan called his captain. "I want to meet him," he said. "Who?" "The man I pulled over," Ryan replied. "I need to apologize. We ain't face to face." The captain paused. "That's not standard procedure, Ryan." "I know," he said quietly. "But it's the right thing to do." Across town, the man was surprised to get a message from the police department asking if he'd be open to meeting the officer privately. He thought about it for a while. Part of him wanted to say no, to move on, forget it happened. But something inside told him this was bigger than pride. "All right," he said finally. "Let's talk." A meeting was set up at the department for the next afternoon. When Ryan walked into the small conference room, he felt nervous. More nervous than he'd ever been during any call, chase, or arrest. He wasn't wearing his uniform. He didn't want the badge to speak for him this time. He wanted his words to. When the man entered the room, they shook hands. Firm, silent, but real. Ryan looked him in the eye and said, "I was wrong." The man didn't say anything at first. He just waited, giving him space to continue. "I let my assumptions guide me," Ryan said. "You didn't do anything wrong, and I judged you before I even knew you. I can't take it back, but I can learn from it." The man nodded slowly. "That's all I wanted. Acknowledgement." For a moment, the tension that had hung between them dissolved. Two people, once strangers on opposite sides of a situation, now stood in the same room, understanding each other a little better. Neither of them knew it then, but that quiet meeting would soon become part of a larger story. One that would make both of them think differently about what justice and respect really meant. Outside, the city kept moving, the same noise, the same rush. But for those two men, something small had shifted. And sometimes that's where change begins. The meeting between the officer and the man had ended quietly, but its effect lingered. They didn't hug, they didn't pose for pictures. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was real, honest and heavy in a way that made both of them think long after they walked out of that small room. For the man, it was closure. For the officer, it was the beginning of something he hadn't expected: guilt, reflection, and a need to understand the world from a different side. 2 days later, Officer Ryan sat at home with his morning coffee, flipping through the local news. He didn't expect to see anything about himself again, but there it was, his face on the screen, frozen mid-sentence from that viral video. The reporter's voice played over it. After a controversial traffic stop last week, the man involved has been identified as one of the city's leading entrepreneurs and philanthropists. He is also the son of the newly appointed police commissioner. Ryan froze. The cup in his hand nearly slipped. He turned the volume up. The reporter continued. Sources confirm that the department is reviewing the incident internally. The commissioner's office has not made a formal statement, but is expected to address the situation later this week. Ryan stared at the TV, his heart racing. The man he stopped, the one he questioned, the one he doubted, was the commissioner's son. The same commissioner who had taken office only a month ago? He leaned back on the couch, exhaling slowly. Suddenly, everything from that morning replayed again in painful detail. The tone of his voice, the way he had asked if the car was his, the crowd watching, the man's calm face. He remembered thinking he'd been professional. Now he wasn't so sure. Within hours, the news spread through the department like wildfire. Some officers tried to act casual. Others whispered in hallways. Everyone knew it was a bad look. For Ryan, for the department, even for the commissioner, who had built a reputation on fairness and community trust. By noon, Ryan got the call he was dreading. "The commissioner wants to see you," his captain said. Ryan felt his stomach twist. "Now?" "Yes, now," she said. "And Ryan, be respectful. She's angry, but she's also calm. Just tell the truth." He drove to headquarters trying to rehearse what he'd say, but nothing sounded right. Every version of his explanation sounded like an excuse. When he arrived, the building felt different. People looked at him longer than usual, some with pity, some with judgment. He walked down the long corridor to the commissioner's office. Each step heavier than the last. He knocked softly. "Come in," a woman's voice said. The commissioner sat behind her desk, confident, poised, the kind of leader who didn't need to raise her voice to command attention. She gestured toward the chair opposite her. "Sit down, Officer Ryan." He sat, his posture stiff. "I'm sure you know why you're here," she began. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. She looked directly at him, her expression unreadable. "You stopped my son last week." "Yes, ma'am," he said again, his throat dry. "Tell me why," she said simply. Ryan hesitated. There was no easy answer, and she could see it on his face. "I thought something was off," he said. "I saw the car and I assumed it didn't match the driver. That was my mistake." She leaned forward slightly. "You assumed it didn't match the driver? Or you assumed the driver didn't match the car?" The question hit like a sharp edge. Ryan swallowed hard. "Both, maybe," he admitted. She didn't speak for a moment. The silence in the room was heavy. Then she said softly, "You realize how that sounds, don't you?"
"Yes, ma'am."
"I do now." Her voice stayed calm, but her eyes carried the weight of a mother and a leader all at once. "My son told me he forgave you. That surprised me. I'm not sure I could have done the same in his place." Ryan looked down. "He showed me more grace than I deserved." "He did," she said. "And that's what hurts the most. Because he shouldn't have to." Those words sat between them like a truth neither could escape. After a pause, she asked, "Do you know what my son does for a living?" Ryan nodded. "He runs a tech company, ma'am." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "That's one way to say it. He built one of the largest startups in this city, employs over 100 people, donates to schools, funds police youth programs. He's helped this department more times than you probably realize." Ryan felt smaller with every word. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "That's exactly the point," she said. "You didn't know. You didn't ask. You just assumed." He nodded slowly, unable to argue. She sighed. "Ryan, I'm not here to destroy your career. But you need to understand what this did. My son wasn't angry about being stopped. He was hurt that someone wearing our uniform couldn't see past his skin before deciding he was suspicious. That's what I'm fighting to change, inside and outside this building." Ryan looked up, his eyes tired. "I understand now. I really do." The commissioner studied him for a moment. "Do you? Because understanding means more than saying the words. It means living differently afterward." He nodded again, this time with conviction. "I want to learn. I don't want this to be the way people see me." She leaned back in her chair. "Then maybe we can make something good out of it." He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I want you to work with me," she said. "Not as punishment, as part of a training program we're launching. It's about community trust, awareness, empathy, real conversations, not just classroom slides. I want you to speak from experience." Ryan blinked, caught off guard. "You want me to speak?" "After what happened?" "Yes," she said firmly. "Because sometimes people listen better to someone who made the mistake than someone lecturing about it. If you're willing to be honest about what happened, it could make a difference." He hesitated. "And your son? Would he be okay with that?" She gave a small smile. "He's the one who suggested it." Ryan felt a wave of surprise. "He did?" "Yes, he told me you were honest when you met. He said he believed you wanted to change. That was enough for me to listen." Ryan sat back, letting the weight of it sink in. The very man he had wronged was now opening a door for him to redeem himself. "I'll do it," Ryan said finally. "If it helps." The commissioner nodded. "Good. We'll start next week." When Ryan left her office, the sunlight hit him differently. He still felt guilt, but there was something else mixed with it now. Purpose. Maybe this could be a chance to do more than apologize. Maybe he could actually grow. Later that evening at the tech company's office, the commissioner's son was still working late. His mother stopped by after her long day. "I spoke to him," she said as she entered his office. He looked up. "Ryan?" "Yes, I told him about the program." He agreed. He smiled softly. "Good. He seemed sincere when we met." She sat across from him. "You really think people like him can change?" He nodded slowly. "I think people can learn if they're given the chance." He didn't know how it feels to be on the other side of that badge. Now he does. She studied him for a moment. "You have your father's patience," he laughed lightly. "You always say that when I don't lose my temper." "Well," she said, standing, "let's hope your patience rubs off on more people." Over the next week, word spread that a new program was starting inside the department. Not a lecture, not mandatory training, but a series of honest talks between officers and community members. Ryan was one of the first to volunteer. On the first day, he stood in front of a small group of officers. Some looked skeptical, others curious. He took a breath and began. "I made a mistake," he said simply. "Not because I broke a rule, but because I let my own bias decide someone's worth before I even knew who they were." That moment taught me more than any class I've taken. The room was silent. It wasn't a speech. It was just truth. In the back, the commissioner's son listened quietly. He didn't interrupt or correct him. He just watched as Ryan spoke with sincerity, not as a man trying to clear his name, but as one trying to make something right. Afterward, they exchanged a nod. No words, no big moment. Just a quiet understanding, the kind that builds bridges slowly, one conversation at a time. Outside the station, the city carried on. Cars, sirens, laughter, life. Most people didn't know the full story of what had happened between those two men, and maybe they never would. But change doesn't always start in headlines. Sometimes it begins in rooms where two people decide to listen instead of argue. And that small shift, as simple as it seemed, was already starting to ripple further than either of them could see. The story of the traffic stop had already reached the public, but now it began to spread far beyond what anyone expected. What had started as a short clip on social media had turned into something much larger. News articles, radio talks, and even community debates. People weren't just talking about what happened. They were talking about what it meant. The video was everywhere, on phones, in offices, on morning news shows. It wasn't the most dramatic thing the internet had ever seen. There was no yelling, no fight. But that was exactly why it struck people. It showed something quieter, something real. In the video, a man was stopped for no reason other than being behind the wheel of a car that someone thought he shouldn't own. His calm voice, his quiet composure, his choice not to argue, it all said more than shouting ever could. For some, it was a wake-up call. For others, it was another reminder of what they already knew too well. Meanwhile, the man at the center of it all tried to keep living normally. He still went to work every morning, still greeted his team, still made sure his company ran smoothly. But the attention was growing and it was getting harder to ignore. One afternoon, his assistant walked into his office with a tablet in her hand. "You're on the front page," she said softly. He looked up confused. "Front page?" She nodded and handed him the tablet. There it was, a photo of him speaking at the community meeting under the headline, "Entrepreneur Forgives Officer After Unjust Stop, Calls for Understanding, Not Hate." He sighed. "They make it sound like a movie." "It's spreading fast," she said. "People are calling you brave." He shook his head. "I'm not brave. I just spoke honestly." That night he turned on the TV and saw a news panel discussing the incident. Some praised his calm reaction. Others debated whether the officer's actions reflected something deeper about bias and assumptions. He watched quietly, not liking the attention but realizing something important. This wasn't just about him anymore. It had become a mirror for people to look at themselves. Across town, Officer Ryan sat in his living room watching the same coverage. His phone buzzed every few minutes with messages from fellow officers, old friends, and even strangers. Some offered support. Others criticized him harshly. At first, he tried not to read the comments, but curiosity got the better of him. He scrolled through hundreds of posts. Some said, at least he owned up to it. Others said, he shouldn't be a cop if that's how he thinks. He rubbed his eyes, feeling the weight of it all. It wasn't easy seeing himself painted as the villain, even though he knew he'd made a mistake. But deep down, he also knew that maybe this kind of discomfort was necessary, not just for him, but for others who might see themselves in his actions. A few days later, the police department announced a press conference. The commissioner was going to address the issue publicly for the first time. The whole city was watching. In the press room, cameras flashed as reporters filled the seats. The commissioner stood at the podium, calm and steady. "We are aware of the recent incident involving one of our officers and a member of the community," she began. "The situation has opened important conversations about fairness, respect, and how we see one another." She paused before continuing. "The man involved in this case happens to be my son, but that does not change the fact that he was treated unfairly. However, instead of anger, he has chosen forgiveness and dialogue. I believe that choice gives us all something to learn from." The reporters scribbled notes. Some raised eyebrows. Few people knew the personal connection until that moment. "My department will continue to work on improving training and awareness," she said. "We are not perfect, but we can become better. And that starts with listening." It was one of those rare press conferences that felt real. Not scripted, not defensive. People across the city felt that sincerity. Later that evening, the man called his mother. "That was brave," he said. She smiled through the phone. "It was necessary. You didn't have to mention I was your son." "I did," she replied. "It's the truth. And the truth matters." Meanwhile, Ryan was called into the station the next morning. His captain handed him a file. "You're part of the community project now," she said. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. It's going to be rough at first," she added. "People will look at you and see that video before they see the person. But you've got to earn back that trust one day at a time." "I understand," he said. "I'm ready." The first event was held at a local high school auditorium. It wasn't formal, just a simple setup with folding chairs, a small stage, and a microphone. The audience was a mix of students, parents, and officers in uniform. Ryan stood at the edge of the stage, feeling nervous. He wasn't used to speaking in front of people, especially about his own mistakes. Then he saw the man sitting in the front row. That gave him courage. When it was his turn to speak, Ryan walked up slowly, adjusting the mic. "I'm not proud of what I did," he began. "But I'm here because I want to be honest about it." He took a deep breath and continued. "I stopped someone because I thought something didn't add up. But what really didn't add up was my own thinking. I didn't see the person. I saw a stereotype. That's on me." The room was silent. You could hear the faint hum of the lights above. "I've learned more in the past few weeks than I did in years of training," he said. "Because training teaches you the law, but life teaches you people, and people deserve to be seen for who they are, not what someone assumes about them." When he finished, the audience didn't cheer right away. They just sat quietly, taking it in. Then someone started clapping, and the rest followed. After the event, a young student came up to him and said, "My dad got stopped once like that. I used to think all cops were bad." "Maybe they're not," Ryan smiled faintly. "Some of us are still learning," he said. Outside, he found the man waiting near his car. "You did well," the man said. "Thanks," Ryan replied. "I just spoke the truth." "That's all people want, honesty," the man said. "Not perfection, just truth." They stood there for a moment, two people who had once met on opposite sides of a car window, now standing on equal ground. Over the next few weeks, more community talks followed. Ryan and the man attended some together, some separately. Each time more people came, officers, students, parents, even local business owners. The story had stopped being about one traffic stop. It had become about change, empathy, and the small steps people take to understand one another. One evening, after another long event, Ryan sat in his car, looking at the city lights. He remembered the first time he saw that luxury car and how different he had felt then. Suspicious, uneasy, ready to assume the worst. Now he saw things differently. He realized how quickly fear could disguise itself as caution, and how easy it was to forget that every person behind the wheel behind a badge or behind a headline, had a story of their own. Back at home, the man scrolled through social media. The comments had changed. People were still talking, but now the tone was different. There were more messages about hope, about listening, about second chances. He smiled quietly. Not because everything was fixed, but because it was moving in the right direction. The next morning his phone rang. It was a journalist asking for an interview. He thought about saying no again, but then paused. "All right," he said finally, "but I don't want to talk about anger. I want to talk about solutions." The interview aired that weekend. In it, he said, "The world doesn't change overnight, but it changes every time we choose patience over pride and understanding over judgment." People shared it everywhere. Even Ryan's fellow officers watched it at the station. One of them turned to him and said, "He's right, you know." Ryan nodded slowly. "He is." A few days later, the two men crossed paths again, this time at a charity event hosted by the commissioner's office. They laughed softly at how life had brought them together again. "I think the city's starting to heal a bit," the man said. "Maybe," Ryan replied, "or maybe it's just starting to listen." They both smiled. That night, as the event ended and everyone started to leave, the man looked around the room. Officers chatting with residents, teenagers asking questions, people sharing food and stories. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. A bridge, however small. And in a world that often broke too easily, a bridge like that mattered more than anyone realized. A few months had passed since the story had first caught the city's attention. Life had started to settle again, but not quite the same way as before. Something had changed. Quietly, deeply, in the hearts of both men who had found themselves on opposite sides of that one strange day. The man had gone back to focusing on his work, his projects and his outreach efforts, but every now and then, he would receive messages from people across the country. Messages that told him how his calmness during that traffic stop had helped them rethink how they handled anger, frustration, or injustice in their own lives. Some wrote things like, "I saw myself in your patience." Others said, "I showed my son your video. I wanted him to see that dignity doesn't mean silence, and it means strength." He didn't always know how to respond to those messages, but they warmed his heart. It reminded him that something good had come out of something painful. Meanwhile, Ryan had changed too. After being suspended for several weeks, he had been allowed to return to the force, but under new conditions. He wasn't on patrol anymore. Instead, he had been assigned to community engagement programs, public speaking sessions, and diversity training workshops for officers. At first, he had thought it was just punishment dressed as progress, but over time he realized it was something better, a second chance. He was learning to listen, really listen, to people he had never taken time to understand before. He met young students who told him how scared they felt around officers. He met parents who said they wanted their kids to trust the police again, but didn't know how to teach them that. It wasn't always easy. There were days when Ryan left the room with his heart heavy and his pride bruised. But those were the days he grew the most. Then one morning he got an email from the department's training division. The subject line read, "New guest speaker confirmed, Officer Development Workshop." When he opened the message and read the name, he froze. It was him. The man from that day. He sat back in his chair for a long time, reading the line again and again. The department had invited him to speak at the same workshop Ryan would be attending. The day of the event arrived quietly. It was held in the city conference center, a tall glass building that overlooked the skyline. The main hall was filled with officers in uniform, some young and eager, others older and skeptical. Ryan sat near the front, trying not to stand out. He wasn't sure how this was going to go. Part of him was nervous, part of him was curious. Then the man walked onto the stage. He wasn't wearing a suit or trying to look important. He looked simple, approachable, calm, the same way he had looked that day by the roadside. The audience clapped politely. He smiled slightly and began to speak. "I didn't come here to lecture anyone," he said. "I came to share what happens when assumptions meet reality." The room grew quiet. He talked about the day of the stop, not with anger or bitterness, but with honesty. He spoke about the fear that came in those few moments when he realized he was being treated like a suspect for simply driving home from work. He spoke about the confusion, the disbelief, but also the decision to stay calm. "I could have yelled," he said softly. "I could have fought. But I realized something. Anger might make a point, but calmness makes a change." He paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. Then he smiled and looked toward the audience. "I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm here because I believe people can change. That includes me, and that includes officers like the one who stopped me." Ryan felt a lump in his throat. He could feel a few glances turning his way. The man continued, "That officer and I, we've spoken since that day. And I can tell you this, understanding doesn't come from winning arguments. It comes from listening to each other's truth." He told the officers that trust wasn't built in speeches or headlines. It was built in small actions, small decisions, the way one spoke to a stranger, the way one paused before judging. When he finished, the hall erupted in applause. But it wasn't the loud, empty kind. It was genuine. After the session, officers lined up to shake his hand and thank him for his words. Some looked emotional. Others simply nodded in quiet respect. Ryan waited until the line had thinned out before walking over. When their eyes met, there was no tension, just recognition. "Good to see you again," the man said, extending his hand. Ryan shook it firmly. "Good to see you too. You spoke beautifully. Thank you. I wasn't sure how it would go." The man replied with a small laugh. "You said exactly what people needed to hear," Ryan said. "You even said what I needed to hear." The man looked at him and nodded. "We all need reminders sometimes." They stood there for a moment in silence. Then Ryan said, "You know, I still think about that day. I wish I could take it back." "You can't," the man said gently. "But you can turn it into something better. And it looks like you already have." Ryan smiled faintly. "I'm trying." "That's enough," the man replied. "Trying is how change begins." They both laughed softly, and for the first time, Ryan felt the weight of that day lift off his shoulders completely. Later that afternoon, during the final session, the training coordinator invited both men to speak together in a closing dialogue. They sat side by side on the stage, answering questions from the audience. One young officer raised his hand and asked, "How do we make sure we don't fall into the same mistakes?" The man answered first. "Remember that everyone you meet is carrying their own story. You don't have to know it. You just have to respect that it's there." Ryan added, "And check your first thought. It's not always wrong, but it's not always right either. Slow down. Ask questions before you make decisions." Their words were met with nods across the room. When the event ended, the two of them walked out together into the soft evening light. The sky was streaked with gold and orange as the sun began to set. Ryan turned to him. "You know, I think that training did more for me than anyone else." The man smiled. "Then it was worth it." They walked a few more steps in silence. Then Ryan said, "I used to think being a good cop meant always being right. Now I think it means being willing to be wrong and still keep learning." "That's the best kind of good," the man said. Ryan nodded slowly, then looked out over the skyline. "Funny how one bad moment can turn into something that helps people." The man looked at him and said quietly, "That's how growth works. It hurts first, then it heals." As they shook hands for the last time that evening, the city lights began to flicker on around them. Neither of them knew if the world would ever truly change the way they hoped. But they both knew something had changed inside them. Something small, but real, and maybe that was enough. In the weeks that followed, the department started a new program, one that paired officers with local community members for open conversations and shared projects. The idea came from that workshop, and both men had helped design it. It wasn't about blame or guilt. It was about understanding, about listening before judging. Months later, when the man was invited to speak again at a youth conference, he mentioned that program in his talk. He said, "Change doesn't always come from power. Sometimes it comes from a conversation. Sometimes it's just one person saying to another, 'I see you, and I'm willing to learn.'" The audience applauded, and somewhere in that same city, Officer Ryan sat watching the clip on his phone. He smiled quietly and whispered, "Thank you," though no one was there to hear it. And just like that, two lives that had collided by mistake had created something meaningful. Not through anger, not through revenge, but through the simple act of seeing one another as human.